welcome back to the show. This is Mr. Justin Buffer speaking to you today. Thank you so much for all of you for the fantastic suggestions and questions and comments on the show. I'm so glad it's been helpful. So many of you, I see our subscriber count is growing, our views are growing. So many of you are benefiting from this, helping you navigate the often very Byzantine college planning, college admissions process. And again, with my 25 plus years in education, as a classroom teacher, school leader, educational leader, the owner of my own tutoring and learning center, being 25 years plus in college admissions, I love sharing my insights with all of you, and I'm so glad it's been beneficial. Again, thank you for your suggestions, for show ideas, and the one I want to focus on today is the one so many of you have been asking about in the questions to our YouTube page about test optional policies and how to navigate them. And I want to talk about the way I help my students navigate those test optional policies. And the first thing I want to point out is that here's the truth with those policies. The question is, for those of you, just to keep you up to date, SAT and ACT submission policies were always, up until the COVID and the coronavirus period starting in, commencing in March 2020, SAT and ACT were pretty mandatory for all colleges. No colleges had test optional policies. After COVID, during COVID, they became optional because not everyone could get access to take the test. So what happened is, once the coronavirus cleared up, many colleges kept their test optional policies as a way of, improving, equity. And equity does not mean equality. It means keeping things equitable, where certain students didn't always have the money or availability to go to a testing center and take the SAT or ACT. But I want to point out first, when I get into this, is that having been in admissions for so much long, still the top schools, we're talking the top school, the top 25 to 30 schools in the country, especially the Ivy League, vast majority, overwhelming majority, the predominant majority of students that get in submitted test scores. Very rarely, despite colleges using words like that their admissions are holistic, it's still almost virtually impossible to get in without a high standardized test score, because colleges have a brand to protect. They need kids that can handle the rigor of a very competitive school and testing. Standardized tests are a way of highlighting that ability, because standardized testing is standardized, whereas grades are really regionalized and can be tricky, because a student can go to a high school that's not very competitive and be very good scores, but standardized tests help colleges compare students across schools with different grading systems and different competition pools. So that's the first thing I want to point out. So standardized tests still very important. The other thing I want to point out as we get into this topic is that everything prior to standardized tests being quote-unquote optional was optional. AP tests were optional. Having strong extracurricular background was optional. Having strong classes and competitive and taking a rigorous course load was quote-unquote optional, but people still did it because it was understood implicitly that you still did it because it would help you stand out. It's no different from now from SAT or ACT. It is optional, but is still highly recommended and makes you highly competitive, just like those things were prior to these SAT and ACT becoming quote-unquote optional, okay? It's no different, okay? So admissions officers, remember, are building a community. I always say they're building a community, not letting an individual. They're building a cohesive community, and they're not just checking boxes. So just like leadership roles were not mandatory, or honors classes were not mandatory, they were quote-unquote optional. They're very good to have, just as high standardized test scores are. They give admissions officers a reason to say yes, okay? So this matters more now, with more students applying to competitive schools, because test optional policies have made students, sometimes unfairly and I believe in a misguided way, from guidance counselors or anybody else who is telling them think they have a better chance because it's optional. Admissions applications have skyrocketed. This has been very good branding for schools, very good marketing for schools to get more applications by making test scores optional, okay? So, but submitting your scores obviously still gives you a high edge, and it's even more important to submit them if your scores are the right ones to submit. So how do you know if you should submit them? If the rule of thumb is, if your scores are above the median range, the 50th percentile range, the admitted range of students usually in the percentile, you should submit them. So in other words, let's take a school like one that's not super competitive to give you an idea, and then we'll take one that's super competitive. Let's take a school like Rutgers University. Rutgers here, we are based out of New Jersey here. Rutgers average, usually their middle 50th percentile, is above the 1300 on the SAT and about 29 on the ACT, 29 to 30 on the ACT. If your scores are above that range, you should absolutely submit them no matter what. If you're below that range, a little bit below, again, it depends on your GPA. Everything is contextual. When I work with my students, I make a decision with them whether they submit their scores based on these factors, but also based on their GPA and how it would hurt them or help them. Even if a student is below the median, but their grades are very low and their scores are proportionally better, if they're in the upper 40th percentile for SAT or ACT, but their grades are lower than their school average, they should still submit them. So everything is contextual, and if you're not working with me, students should ask their guidance counselor or a trusted adult who knows about these things accurately if they should submit their scores under this test optional system. But the one rule of thumb to start with is if you are above the school's average, the 50th percentile average, you should submit them. Now for an Ivy League, so let's go on the high end, Ivy League school like Cornell. So Cornell's a good example. I'm working with a lot of students now on their Cornell essays and Cornell applications, and Cornell's 25th percentile is 1490 up on the SAT and 33 and up on the ACT. So if you are above those ranges, absolutely you should submit your scores. They can help you because you're within a school's 25th percentile. But if you're applying to an Ivy League school and your SATs are below their median range, but your GPA is higher, then maybe withholding the scores can be good. And again, I'll be completely honest, it's still going to be very hard to get into an Ivy League school without a good SAT score. Again, on college visits, marketing promos, they will say, oh, you should make that up. You can make that decision. It won't hurt you, but also won't help you if you don't have scores to submit. So holistic admissions means one thing, but not having those scores to submit can hurt you. So those decisions are made strategically, whether they can help you or hurt you. And again, for those of you who aren't working with me and just listening to this all over the world and the country, if your child is applying to an Ivy League school or a top tier institution like Georgetown, Northeastern, University of Michigan, then if their scores are below the admitted students' range, the 30th, 50th percentile, they should not submit them. Again, unless their GPA is really low and their score would offset that. On the other hand, if a student's GPA, if they go to a very competitive high school, let's think about where an SAT, ACT score in this test optional could really help a student. I have students, let's say they're the low 16th to 20th percentile of the GPA in their school, in their class rank, because they go to a very competitive high school, which we have a lot of here in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area, but their SAT scores are high. 1550, 1590, ACT 34, 35. They should absolutely submit those scores, because that could tell a college, wait a minute, maybe in their school they are just, there's a very competitive pool. Maybe they have a hard time standing out in their school. For instance, in New Jersey, we have Montgomery High School. I had students with 1550, 35 in their ACT who came to me for college planning, they did not and they even came here for SAT prep. They did not, in their school though, they had a hard time standing out because the grades were so stratified, compressed, because high schools have a desire to really stratify their scores to mean everybody can't have an A. They might have had a B- average in their school, but they have a 1550 in the SAT. That tells a college, wait a minute, this kind of looks odd to us. They see because colleges get a school report and they can see that student might have had a really lower GPA than they should have, whereas if they were in a less competitive high school in New Jersey, might have had a higher GPA, and the SAT and ACT score helps put that in context. Even my days as a classroom teacher, I knew that, high school teachers don't want everybody to get an A. That kind of looks, a little bit off, so things are very competitive. They want there to be a healthy distribution of grades where certain kids have B's, some kids have low B's, that everybody can have an A. But SAT scores help put that in context, ACT scores. So you want to submit them to offset a lower GPA, a lowly competitive GPA. So the other thing is SAT and ACT, the key thing to remember, regardless of test optional, they are still, because colleges know, especially the top tier schools know, that high schools can have inflated, right now, of inflated GPAs, inflated grades. SAT scores and ACT scores are still the predominant methodology for handing out merit-based scholarships. So merit-based scholarships are still going to come off of an SAT and ACT score, okay? Because that's the only way they can make it fair and compare kids across schools. I've had students be in the lower 30th percentile of their very competitive high school, like Montgomery High School here in New Jersey, Princeton High School, but get a full scholarship to certain schools based on their SAT or ACT scores. So you should absolutely be getting prepping for these, submitting these scores to schools that are the higher level schools if your score stands out, because they can help you get a merit-based scholarships. So let's keep in mind, test optional is not test blind. Test option, just like before COVID, AP scores being optional was not AP scores being blind to it, okay? So you should absolutely submit your scores for scholarships to help you stand out. If your scores are within a school's upper range or middle range, they can absolutely help you. Test optional does not mean test blind. I'll repeat that again. Very important statement, okay? So you can use your SAT scores, ACT scores, AP scores even. Those are optional too to submit if they're high in the 5 and 4 range as a strategic opportunity, rather than something that you feel you should not submit. Okay, schools want to see the full picture of you. I spoke to an officer at University of Michigan recently, and they told me we want to see those scores if they're good. They will help us make a decision. So they're not something you should get the false hope that feel like because we have a high GPA and got low scores, all of a sudden it's an automatic excuse that it excuses you. It's not. You want to get the highest scores you can and submit those scores when you can, and use it strategically. This is not to say that someone with a super high GPA, half of their class, cannot get into a top school if they don't have good scores. They absolutely can, but it's going to be the rarity and the anomaly rather than the norm. Okay, I really hope that I appreciate all the questions on this. I hope this answers a lot of your questions and puts this test optional thing into great context. If you have further questions on this, please submit your questions. Please follow up with my staff to set up a consultation with me, and we can meet about these things. So again, thank you all for tuning into the show. I hope this was a beneficial show for all of you. Thank you for tuning in and your participation, your subscriptions. If you're not subscribed, please like and subscribe so you can get more of these shows. And I look forward to connecting with you all soon. Have a fantastic day and stay safe and happy holidays.